Our journey is not complete until our gay brothers and sisters are treated like anyone else under the law. For if we are truly created equal, then surely the love we commit to one another must be equal as well.
This morning, the Supreme Court recognized that the Constitution guarantees marriage equality.
And for that we have each other. And for that we have each other. Oh. We will rise, we will rise, we will rise. Oh.
When you fly that flag, when you come out, when you tell your story, your personal story, who you are, every single one of you here today, that story has the power to change hearts. And that's what changes minds. And you change minds, you can change a city. You change a city, you can change a country. You change a country, and we can change this world to a world that talks less. A world that talks less about building walls and more about the embrace of diversity.
In the beginning of gay history in America, being homosexual or heterosexual was not a construct. Rather, it was a matter of how masculine or feminine a person was. However, by the 1930s, gay people were being limited and forced out of society, leading them to create their own underground world where they can freely express themselves. Then came the Stonewall riots, where police raided the Stonewall Inn on June 28, 1969, and started hurting the patrons there, who in return started fighting back, leading to 6 days of riots. This was a historic event and is the reason why the LGBTQ+ community exists today. It led to the rise in LGBTQ+ activism, but the community faced a huge blow when the AIDS epidemic occurred. Most people who were affected by the epidemic were LGBTQ+ people, and nothing was done about it until straight people were also being affected. The community faced a lot of hardships with policies such as the Defense of Marriage Act and the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which restricted LGBTQ+ individuals from being allowed to marry and restricted them from being open about their sexuality. Despite this, the community kept fighting back to gain equal rights. And in the past 20 years, they achieved many things, such as the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, and in Lawrence versus Texas, the Supreme Court struck down the state's anti-sodomy law, which decriminalized homosexual relations nationwide. And just 5 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that states cannot ban same-sex marriage, making gay marriage legal throughout the country and rendering DOMA powerless. These historical points that I have briefly went over demonstrates how hard the community has fought for equal rights and motivates many LGBTQ+ people to not give up. Despite this progress, most schools don't talk about LGBTQ+ history nor mention the impacts LGBTQ+ individuals had on society. Knowing this, I decided to give out an online survey for people in the US to take to see whether they received an inclusive or non-inclusive education and how that education has impacted them. The survey contained 14 questions, 13 of which are open-ended. In total, 118 students took the survey. From those 118 students, 32 are straight, 21 of them being straight females and 11 of them being straight males. And 86 are LGBTQ+, where 7 of them are male, 63 are female, 11 are non-binary or questioning their gender, and 5 are transgender. The students that took the survey came from 30 states and range from 7th to college grade level. One of the questions asked those who identify as part of the LGBTQ+ community what their experiences were like in school. Out of the 86 LGBTQ+ students, 9 of them have felt they had positive, safe, and accepting experiences at school and felt very comfortable coming out to others. 11 have felt they had negative experiences in school and are not comfortable coming out at all, while 61 students have felt they had generally or relatively accepting experiences and felt somewhat safe and or accepted at school, and are out to some or a few students and or teachers. Despite the majority of people feeling generally or somewhat accepted and safe/supported, when all 118 participants were asked if their school had an LGBTQ inclusive education, A majority of 78 students said their school did not have an LGBTQ inclusive education whatsoever. When all students were asked how the presence of the LGBTQ plus community in an inclusive or non-inclusive education has impacted them, many straight students said that the presence of the community has made them become more empathetic and open-minded, while LGBTQ plus students said that the community has made them feel more accepted and supported, as well as letting them freely express themselves. For students who had a non-inclusive education, some felt that because of the non-inclusivity, they became more willing to research and try to understand the LGBTQ plus community on their own, while others felt that it hasn't impacted them because they have their own personal beliefs on how they see others. As for those with an inclusive education, they felt they understood the community more and saw them in a more positive outlook. However, due to my survey being only 118 students, it doesn't reflect every LGBTQ plus student's experiences and impacts. GLSEN, on the other hand, has taken multiple surveys on the effects and impacts of an inclusive and non-inclusive education in America, and found that LGBTQ plus students who are in schools with non-inclusive education, with no support and a hostile environment report a higher percentage of skipping school, a lower percentage in a desire for educational opportunities and academic success, and a higher level of depression and a lower level of self-esteem. One study also saw that LGBTQ plus students were 2 to 3 times more likely to get bullied and 5 times more likely to attempt suicide. Another study noticed that bullied LGBTQ plus students reported to have a higher rate of substance abuse and risky behaviors than bullied straight students. However, schools with an inclusive education had a more positive impact on students. GLSEN reports that schools with an inclusive education had many positive effects on LGBTQ plus students and improved their school experiences. They performed better in classes and had a much lower percentage for skipping school, a higher percentage in a desire for educational opportunities and academic success, a lower level of depression, and a higher level of self-esteem. Overall, students with an LGBTQ inclusive curriculum lived a much healthier life both mentally and emotionally, and were able to freely express themselves without much prejudice. As you can probably tell, an inclusive LGBTQ plus education has a great impact on students who need that support and positive environment. But what would an LGBTQ inclusive education look like? Well, many LGBTQ plus students have stated they would like a more inclusive and positive sex education, where gay, lesbian, transgender, non-binary, and asexual people are represented, so that they can also be informed of safe sex methods for themselves, and be educated on LGBTQ plus terms. Many students also said they want LGBTQ plus representation in history classes, because there are so many things that the community has gone through and done for society that has impacted our country, but is never talked about. This also applies for English class, where many students agreed that they wanted to be taught about LGBTQ plus authors, writers, poets, and artists, and read LGBTQ plus literature and works in class, as well as have talks and discussions. Here are some quotes from students who took my survey on what they personally would like to see in an LGBTQ inclusive education. You can pause the video at any time if you want to read them. So, why is an LGBTQ inclusive education necessary and important? Many American schools don't really put an emphasis on an LGBTQ inclusive education, as you can see from the results from both GLSEN's and my survey, due to there not being an apparent importance for it. However, many students struggle with finding their identity, and it becomes an issue for some, where it even affects their mental health and hinders them from being able to do well in school. Knowing this, it's very important to educate and teach students about the LGBTQ plus community, so that LGBTQ plus students know that it is normal, and so that they can explore their identity in a safe and healthy way. This concludes my presentation. However, if any of you have any questions on anything about the LGBTQ plus community that you want to understand, you can ask me or email me and we can have a respectful conversation about it. I put up some terms on this slide just to give insight on some sexualities and genders. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation.
I remember saying to an administrator that I make a conscious choice every day to lie about my sexuality because being gay is definitely a part of who I am, but when people whisper behind your back or treat you different, it feels like sometimes my sexuality consumes my identity,
made me more
and
open-minded,
I'm only seen as
informed,
the
and
gay
curious
kid or
about
that
how
gay
diverse
person.
humans really
It has greatly impacted and improved my life. Having a community that supports who I
It
am
has
has
taught
made
me
my life
not to
much better.
discriminate. Everyone has their own right to expressing themselves whichever
It has
way
impacted
they
my
choose.
life in a massively positive way because I feel like I have found my
Their
people.
point of views or perspectives on the world have changed the way I view it. When they voice their struggles, I realize there are problems everyone goes through, not just racial minorities. Also, being surrounded by enough
When
of
I was
them,
younger,
they've made me feel more
I would think
beautiful
that
in my
same-sex
skin and helped me
relationships
love
were a
myself.
bit odd because I was never presented or informed by it. But
The
with
LGBTQ community has brought me closer to
I've
myself.
changed my perception
It let
on
me
that
know that
and
what I
learned that
feel
you can be
about
in love with
completely
anyone
changed
and
my
who I
life.
love.
Isn't harmful
It
and
changed
isn't
how I
false.
feel about myself, how I feel about others, how I interact
I love this
and understand
community.
others.
There's so
It
much
changed
acceptance.
everything.
I've had such a positive experience in this community, unlike many others. It helped me find
The
LGBTQ+ community has changed my life drastically. It made me feel happier and was a large part of the reason I overcame depression by the end of the 7th grade. I was much happier after I came out, and I couldn't have come out if I had not heard of the community.
It's made me so much more accepting of others.
It gave me hope.
and gave me a
It's
better
nice to
outlook
be
on life.
reassured that my sexuality is normal and
It
more
helps me to
common
see
than
myself in a better light.
I can
I can accept myself by seeing others who accept themselves.
They made me understand that people can be different, but that doesn't mean they are any less than anyone else. I salute these people because they jump over the many hurdles that this society places on them. If they are different from me, the main difference is that they are much stronger. They face more struggles and persevered. I respect them as individuals and hope that this society would become enlightened and accept them without classifying them and keeping them different and isolated.
It made me feel more human because there were other people like me.
Again and again and again.